Okay, we are going to start, and this class is dedicated by one of our students whose name is Miriam. I'm not going to mention her family name as this is by request. So she dedicated this class to someone she has in mind, and it's much appreciated. Thank you, Miriam, for your dedication and for your interest in these subjects. The subject of tonight's class is actually a very, it's kind of a difficult subject to deal with, and that's the concept of male and female in Kabbalah in general, and particularly in the Kabbalah of the Arizal. I have kind of mentioned this thing before, this concept before, of the idea of anthropomorphism, anthropomorphic traits or anthropomorphic expressions in the Torah and in the writings of the prophets. Nowhere do you see this more explicit than in the work called Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. Now, Song of Songs is designated or described rather by the sages as, they say, don't call it Song of Songs, call it Holy of Holies. Right? It's called Holy of Holies, according to the rabbis. Now, what does that mean? It seems to be a love song between two lovers. I think I mentioned this in the Sefer Yetzirah class also. It seems to be a song between two lovers, a male and a female. And what could be more unholy, so to speak, than that? Now, first of all, that attitude comes to a certain extent from the I would say from the legacy of, essentially from the legacy of Christianity, which sees holiness as being divorced from human relationships. Holiness is only between man and the divine, between man and God. And between man and man, it's sort of a, you're grudgingly allowed to get married. It's not something which holy people do. Like, priests and all the way up to the Pope do not get married. And because marriage is seen as sort of throwing a bone to a dog, basically. In other words, indulging your physical passions, which is something unholy. Now, in Judaism, this is not seen as the reality. The holiness of the sexual relationship, to just use the proper term, between man and his partner, between a man and a woman, is in fact blessed from the beginning. The verse states in the first chapter of Genesis, the verse, it's verses 27 and 28, and this is going to be critical to our understanding tonight of matters. So it says like this: Vayivra Elokim et Adam, God created man, but Salmo in his image. B'tzelem Elokim bara oto, in the divine image he created him. And then it says, Zachar unekeva bara otam, male and female he created them. Now I'm going to go back to this and discuss it a bit more in detail, but here's the second verse. This is verse 28. Vayevarech otam Elokim, and God blessed them. Vayomer lehem, and he said to them, Pru urevu, be fruitful and multiply, umilu et haaretz, and fill the earth, and so on and so forth. Now, had the sexual encounter being something unholy, or something just, throwing a bone to a dog kind of thing, it would not have been blessed. It's blessed as a holy union, and in fact, a holy communion. And that is why the image of male and female union is regarded as the proper and appropriate metaphor for the communion between man and God. or if you prefer to put it this way, between the soul and God. When I say man, it includes obviously men and women. Between the soul and God. That always, whenever there is a male-female image, the idea is not a male and not a female. God is depicted generally as a male, and the soul is generally depicted as the female. But the images themselves, these depictions of male and female, are simply depictions of something that's working on a higher plane, which is called in the technical jargon, it's called mashpia umakabel, the giver and the receiver, giver and receiver. Now, generally, obviously, God is the giver and we are the receiver. But in ourselves too, we have the aspects of givers and receivers. Between man and woman, generally, man is regarded as the giver and woman is the receiver. Therefore, the sperm is expelled from the man and enters into the woman, receives it. The womb or the female genitalia receive the sperm and so on and so forth. So that's called mashpia and mukabel, giver and receiver. But all of us have within us, and I'm going to discuss this at some length, all of us have within us the concept of giver and receiver. And therefore, in order to really be able to understand how the dynamics of the relationship between the soul and God, we really have to understand to some extent the relationship between man and woman, between male and female, between giver and receiver. Now, it doesn't mean to say that a woman is only a receiver and not a giver. Even in Torah terminology, man is sometimes called the giver. He brings the offering, and God receives the offering. So, in that sense, you could say that that God is regarded as the receiver in that particular encounter. But let us go back to that verse, the first verse that I started. And if anyone wants to see it, actually, let me just share it on screen here. You might be able to see it a bit better. I only have it here in the Hebrew, not in the English. But I'll translate it again. God created man in his image, but he created him in the divine image. And then it says, don't forget, it says twice, Adam, man, as a singular entity, and bara oto, created him. Him doesn't mean necessarily a male pronoun referring only to Adam, but to the composite of male, female, which we'll talk about in a second. Bara oto, but as a single entity. And then it says, Zachar unekeva, male and female, bara otam, he created them. So we move from singular to plural. Now, what is going on? Why is there a singular and a plural over here? What is going on in this discussion? So, this is where things get interesting. Now, just let me remind you of something I've said a number of times. I think I even said it last night in the Sefer Yetzirah class, when Rabbi Chaim Vital was asked to describe the interaction of the various sphirot, he described them by using these male-female images. Now, when we talk about the interaction of the sphirot, generally we talk about the interaction of what is called partzufim. Let me just see, I should have gotten this before, but just let me see if I have a diagram of the partzufim so that you can, you'll be able to see it. Partzufim. Let me see, it might be in this document. 1 second, folks. Sorry about this. No, I just have a definition over here. Okay, this is what a partzuf is. Partzuf is the answer. If you wanna read along with me, I'll show you what it says here. I wrote this for somebody, I don't remember who, but a partzuf is the anthropomorphic representation of a sphera or cluster of sphirot that fulfills a certain function described by the partzuf. For example, the partzuf of Abba, which is the sphera of Chokhmah, has a role among the Sphirot similar to a father's role in the family unit. The Parzuf of Ema, the Sphero of Bina, has a role among the Sphirot similar to a mother's role in the family unit, and so on. Right? So that's what the concept of a Parzuf is all about. But interestingly enough, when we say the role of a father in the family and we describe it as the Sphera of Chochmah, what's the difference between a Parzuf here and a Sphera? What's the difference between a Parzuf and a Sphera? The Sphera looks at a specific primary quality, whereas the Parzuf looks at things more from the point of view not of a quality, but of a relationship. One of the major differences between the teachings of the Arizal, between the teachings of the Arizal and the prior teachings of, let's say, the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero lived in the same generation as the Arizal. He was a little bit older, and he passed away during the time of the Arizal. And then the mantle of leadership of the group of Kabbalists living in Safed, in Tzfat, passed on to the Arizal. In the teachings of Moshe Cordovero, he speaks mostly about the development and how shall you call it, the descent, the ishtalshalut, the chaining down of the sfirot from the highest to the lowest. Whereas the Arizal talks much more about the partzufim, in other words, the interrelationships between the Sphirot rather than just their developmental quality. He doesn't talk so much about development, he talks much more about relationship. And the Baal Shem Tov talks about something even higher than that, which is called the manifestation of godliness through the various parts of him and through the various relationships and so on and so forth. I won't go into that now, but suffice it to say that when we talk about the relationships between Sphirot, we're talking primarily about the concept of Partzufim. Now, let me tell you what these Partzufim are. And I thought I had a list of them and I didn't see it. Just let me hang 1 second again. Partzufim PDF. Yes, I do have it. I thought I had them, but let's see. Okay. No. Sorry, folks. Lack of preparation on my part. You will forgive me, I hope. Let's see here. Maybe this one. All right, and it doesn't matter. Even if we don't have a chart of them, it doesn't really matter that we don't have a chart. We don't really need a chart so much. But the idea is that there are these clusters of Sphirot called the Partzufim. I will describe them. I'll explain what they are. It would be nice to have a chart, and I can easily make one. If anyone wants one, I'll make a chart and I'll send it to you, and how they work with the Sphirot. So as you probably know, you have the Sphirot stretching from the highest Sphirah called Ketter, and then it goes all the way through to Malchut. Keter is the highest Sphirah, then there's Chochmah and Bina. And if you count Keter, you don't count Da'at. So it would be then Chesed and Gvura, and then Tiferet between the two of them on the middle column, and then Netzach and Hod, right and left. Here you go. We have a very good friend here who just posted one that works. There you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Here we go. This is from Rabbi Ginsburg. Rabbi Ginsburg, who was one of my teachers actually in, I think that's from Rabbi Ginsburg from inner.org. In any event, here we go. The Sphero of Ketter. One of the parts of him, he doesn't mention all of the parts of him in Keter, only Arich Anpin. I don't know why it says Arich, but it should be Arich Anpin. Then Abba is Chochmah, Ema is Bina, these 6 Sphirot over here from Tiferet, not that, rather, I'm sorry, Tiferet, which is the middle Sphira, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, are all called Zer Anpin. And this one, the last one, is called Nukva, the female Partzuf, Nukva. This is essentially the most male Partzuf, so to speak, and this is the most female Partzuf. Now, I'll explain what I mean. What about Abba and Ema? I'm going to explain shortly. So these are the Partzufim. Now, in Keter itself, you have more than one Partzuf. You have the outer Partzuf, the lowest Partzuf, the one that we mostly speak about, which is called Arich Anpin. And then you have a more inner Partzuf, a more refined, elevated Partzuf called Atik or Atik Yomin. And in Atik itself, you have various levels. You have Atik Yomin, and then you have Atik, and then you have Radla. Radla is Resha Delo Ityada, right? The beginning which cannot be known. I'm not going to go into the very highest parts of him, but I want to explain to you some important concepts as regards the, there's a question, looks like in the chat. Yeah, this is now, yeah, let me just explain that all of these parts of him occur in all of the worlds. In all of the worlds, you have all 5 of these parts of him. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You also have Atik, but Atik is very sublime, so it's not generally spoken about so much, but it's also there in each world. So each of the worlds, each of the 4 lower worlds, in other words, the lowest world, Asiya, the next world up, Yetzira, the next world up, Bria, and then Atzilut. And then beyond Atzilut, you also have all of these 5 parts of him, and all of them you have the 5 parts of him. And even in Adam Kadmon, you have a somewhat of a likeness to these 5 parts of him, but they're called Shemot, names, holy names. I'll get to that a little bit later. Now, you will note that the Sphirot generally are contrasted in pairs, right? They contrasted in pairs. So for example, Abba and Ema, the father Sphira and the mother Sphira, called father and mother because of the role they play in terms of the Sphirot. The father is what would be called, he plays the father role. In other words, the role of bringing in or producing the seed. Let's put it that way. The role of producing the seed. Whereas the mother, Ema, Bina, plays the role of developing the seed. Now, the seed without any development is a useless seed. The seed has to be planted in order for it to develop. Where is the seed planted? The seed is planted by Abba in Ema, right? That would be what we mentioned before as in human terminology, in the metaphor terminology, the terminology of the analogy, that would be the relationship, the procreative relationship of father to mother to produce children. These are the children that they produce, Zer Anpin and Nukva. Nukva is Malchut, same thing, right? The female Sphira. But you will notice that in the Sphirot, as they are depicted in the diagram, Abba and Ema are on the same level. It's only that Abba is on one side and Ema is on the other. Abba's on the right side, Ema is on the left side. Father right side, mother left side. Chochmah right side, Bina left side. Now, we'll find out later why left and right are important. We're going to get there. But as far as the other 2 are concerned, Zer Anpin and Nukva, and Zer Anpin and Malchut, which are also a pair, they come together as a pair. There is a difference between Zer Anpin and Nukva in the sense that one is higher than the other. One is higher than the other. Zer Anpin is on a higher level than Nukva. They're not on the same level as Abba and Ema are. Now, why that is because you have to have the concept of Mashpia and Makabel, the concept of giver and receiver. That does not mean to say that Malchut is only a receiver, because Malchut then becomes Keter of the next level down, of the next world down. And she becomes the Mashpia. She becomes the primary giver of what's going on in the next world, as the Arich Anpin of the next world, or even higher than that. She, in fact, is manifested as the beginning that is not known, Radla, the highest level of Keter. Okay, good. So we've discussed to a certain extent this idea of the parallel relationship and of the giver-receiver relationship. But even in the parallel relationship, there's a concept of right and left. Now, let me try to explain to you what the concept of right and left is over here. What is going on with right and left? What do we need to know in terms of right and left? Let me explain a somewhat deeper concept. The relationships of the Sphirot one to another, or rather the relationship of the Partsufim one to another, is a dynamic relationship. It's not a static relationship. It's something that keeps on changing over time. And it's a dynamic relationship in the sense that roles and functions shift as the relationship changes. What does that mean? It means on the lower levels of things, down in the lower worlds, and with the lower Partsufim, in other words, with Zer, Anpin, and Malchut, which are the two lowest, there in general, they are understood as discrete, separate Partsufim that come together for a certain function. They come together for a certain function, and that function is to produce children, so to speak. Right? In other words, Zeir, Anpin, and Malchut produce, they're called Tze'etza'im, offspring is the word, offspring in the next world. They produce offspring on the next level down. However, the higher up you go, the less distinction there is between male and female, until the male and female elements amalgamate in Arich Anpin, which is that aspect of Keter, and in the inner dimension of Keter, there's really no distinction between male and female at all. The only distinction is between inner and outer, between inner and outer. And let me explain. We said before that we have essentially 6 Partsufim, even though we only explained 5. That diagram only had 5. But there's a 6th Partsuf, which is the highest one of them all, the sixth Partsuf. And again, don't take these as being the human dimension is a metaphor for these things. These things are way beyond the physical dimensions of the world, the things that we talk about in a physical sense. I know this is going a bit above, where we usually go. I usually try and bring it down a little bit more, but this is what I was asked to teach about, and I think it's an important thing that people should know. So there are 6 in general. There are 6 Partsufim. The highest Partsuf is called Atik, and then Arich. Arich was the level of Keter that we explained, was above all the Sphirot. That was the Sphira of Keter, which is not divided into 2 aspects. It's only one Keter, it's only Arich, right? And then the first place that there's 2 is Abba and Ema, Chochma and Bina. And then you get Zer, Anpin, and Nukva. You get Zer, Anpin being the 6 Sphirot from Chesed to Yesod, and Malchut is Nukva, that's the female. And the reason for this is because Arich Anpin essentially does not have a female element recognized, or male and female elements recognized as distinct entities. When you get to Keter, in Keter itself, these 2 entities actually form one Partsuf. They form one, the translation is visage. They form one entity essentially. the Arizal explains in Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is the primary work of the Arizal. There's actually several of them, but that's the one that is generally most studied. And Ketter is not described as having a male and female element. It's all one thing. That's in Eitz Chaim Sharatik, chapter 2. So we can, to a certain extent, not discuss. We can ignore for the time being the Paratuf of Atik in particular, and we'll just focus on Arich and then the other imminent Paratufim. Arich is a transcendent Paratuf, it's Keter, and the imminent Paratufim are Abba and Ema, and Zer Anpin and Malchut. Okay, good. So there's basically four levels in there. Again, Abba and Ema, and Zer Anpin and Malchut. Now, these Paratufim are differentiated by having a female element, so to speak, within them. In other words, a giver and a receiver, an initiator and a continuer. Just like you have a mother and a father, or a father and a mother. The father is the one who gives the seed, the mother is the one who develops the seed. Giving the seed without developing it is useless. And developing something, or having the potential to develop, the possibility of developing something without receiving it, is also useless on its own. You have to have the two together. You have to have male and female, which is why there's actually a commandment, a mitzvah in the Torah of Pru and Revu. Pru and Revu means to be fruitful and multiply. Yes, the notion of Shechina does come into play in this discussion. Shechina is the Sphero of Malchut, and it's called Shechina because it's Shochenet u'mitlabeshet. It dwells down below and becomes clothed in physical reality, or in the reality of the lowest aspect of that particular world. That's why it's called Shechina. It's the female element of, so to speak, the female element of the Sphirot. Okay, now, the connection, therefore, between male and female elements takes on different forms. In Keter, the male and female elements urge into one thing, so that you cannot even distinguish male and female. It's only distinguished as right and left, but not as male and female, right and left. In Atik, it's only distinguished as having a front and back, forward facing and back facing. But even what faces back is the face that faces back. It's not the back as such. There's Abba and Ema, if you would put it like this. If this is the front of my hand and that's the back of my hands, right? So if I would say that Abba in Atik, the Partzufim the Partzuf of Atik is such that the front of my hands would be like this, so to speak. In other words, back to back, and both of them are facing outwards, right? In other words, they have two faces. Atik has two faces, so to speak, right? In Arich, things are not quite as unified as that, but nevertheless, when we come down a stage further, Abba and Ema, you have two distinct genders, so to speak, two distinct qualities of male and female, called the father Sphira, Abba, and the female Sphira, Ema. But Abba and Ema are always in a state of yichud. They're always together. They're never separated. Abba and Ema are not separated at any stage, right? They're not separated at any stage. So therefore, it's explained in Kabbalistic works that their yichud, their unity is tamidi, is constant. They're always in a state of being joined together, right? Abba and Ema are always in a state of facing each other. They never turn back to back. They never divorced from each other, right? They never separated from each other. It's a yichud tmidi. It's a constant connection between the two of them. Whereas when we're talking about zer anpin and malchut, that is not a yichud tmidi. It's not a constant amalgamation, joining. It is only liprokim from time to time. It's not constant. The yichud, the supernal unification, in other words, of zer anpin and malchut is only from time to time, and they are not equal to each other. In other words, they do not play the same role at all. There are various aspects, in fact, 7 aspects in which they differ. Rabbi Chaim Vital writes in the name of the Arizal in Eitz Chaim, Shar Miut HaYareach, the first chapter, he explains all of the ways in which they differ. There's 7 aspects in which Zer Anpin and Malchut differ. But Abba and Ema, father and mother, emerge as one, they reside as one, and they are called two in the Zohar, they are called the 2 inseparable companions. Abba and Ema, the 2 inseparable companions. Okay. And there's differences, therefore, between Abba and Ema, those 2 partsufim, and the partsufim of Zer Anpin and Malchut. Now, all of this is obviously at a very very highfalutin level, and perhaps it's a little bit too lofty. But just to finish the idea that we started off with, the idea of male and female, so to speak, in Keter, which there's only one partsuf. They're essentially one thing. Those are called the male and female of Arich Anpin, of that aspect of Keter, are called Ma and Ban. What are Ma and Ban? Ma and Ban are 2 divine names, essentially, 2 names which are the, it's actually there, let me just, I'll have to show this to you on a whiteboard. I don't think there's any other way I can do it. Can everyone see the whiteboard now? I can't see the chat, so what's this gonna help? 1 second, let me see the chats. Yeah. Does everyone see the whiteboard? Yeah, you can see the whiteboard. Good. Okay. So the whiteboard says, like on the whiteboard, I'm going to write as follows. The idea of Ma is as follows. When you write out a divine name, right? The divine name is always, this is the divine name, right? Yud Hey. That's the most important of the divine names. It's Yud Hey Vav Hey, or Yud Ke Vav Ke, as they say it, right? So that Yud Hey Vav Hey can be spelled in different ways. One way of spelling it is the Yud is always Yud Vav Dalet, right? That's always equal to 20. Sorry, I'm running with a mouse over here, so it's very messy. All right, that's always equal to 20. And then you have the Hey. The Hey can be spelled in a number of different ways. One of the ways in which the Hey is spelled, if you write it out, it's spelled like this. Hey is spelled Hey Aleph, right? It can also be spelled Hey Yud. It can also be spelled Hey Hey. Hey Hey, right? That's how you spell. 1 second. Let me just do that one. Yeah. Hey Hey. Okay. Hey Hey. Okay. Then you have the same thing with Vav. Vav can be spelled Vav Aleph Vav. It can be spelled Vav Yud Vav, and it can just be spelled Vav Vav. And then the same thing for the final Hey can also be spelled just like this one, right? So it's the same thing. All right, now why is this important? Because if you add these up, you'll find out that they come to different, come to different numbers. This over here comes to 45. This one over here comes to 45. This one comes to 72. This one comes to 52. 52, and there's another one I'm not going to go into. It's an amalgamation of these two, and it comes to 63. Right now, these are all various. What's important about this is these are all, they're given names to describe them. This is called Shema, the name of Ma. Ma is spelled like this in Hebrew, which is 45. That's 40 and 5, 45, right? This is Shema, this is Shem Ab, Ayin Bet. This is Shem Ban. This is 52. Bet is 2, and Nun is 50. And this is Shem Sag, 63. Okay, these are various ways of spelling out the name, the divine, ineffable name. Now, why are we discussing this? Because this permutation of the name over here, where you have Yud Hey Vav Hey spelt in this way, the name 45 over here, right? This one here is called Shema, right? That's what it's called, Shema. This one is called Shem Ban. The Sephardim, in other words, people who came from countries like Morocco and Yemen and so on and so forth, people who came from those countries are generally called as Shem Ben. They don't call it Shem Ban, but we who come from the Ashkenazi countries, from European countries, generally call it Shem Ban. There's a reason for that. I don't want to go into it right now, but in any event, it's called Shem Ban. And the two aspects, these two names here, this name here, Shem Ban and Shem Ma, right? This one here, the 45-letter name, Shem Ma, and this one, the 52-letter name, correspond to the male and female elements, of Ketter. The male and female elements of Ketter are just made up of these two divine names in different permutations. Shem Ma is on the right and Shem Ban is on the left. They call the male and female elements. All right. So to go back to what we were talking about before. So in the attribute of Keter, that's how the male and female elements play out. And generally, the way they are in Arich Anpin is that they are back to back and they only show their front. They don't show their back. What does it mean to only show your front and not show your back? It means to show your, when you show your back in English, the colloquial expression to show your back to somebody means to show them disdain or dislike, right? You don't have that aspect in Keter of disdain and dislike, and therefore the two backs are covered. All you have is the face of the faces facing outwards of Ma and Ban. Right, so you have the facing outwards of Ma and Ban. So that that Ma becomes the sort of forward-facing aspect of things, and Ban becomes the backward-facing aspect of Keter, the posterior aspect rather than the anterior aspect. Now, in Atik itself, in the higher dimension of Keter, I mentioned that there was a higher dimension of Keter. In the higher dimension of Keter, you don't have any left side, it's only right side, right? You don't have any front and back per se, you have only front. There's no, that's why they're back to back, right? There's no right and left. But as you go lower down, as you start going lower down, the aspects of right and left start to be manifested. In other words, front and back is a higher level than left and right, or right and left. And eventually, the amalgamation of the partsufim and how they interact, the amalgamation of the various names and how they interact becomes very important understanding of how the Sphirot generally interact with each other. Now, in Keter, they interact in such a way that they show each other face to face, so to speak. And as the levels go down, so they start more and more and more to separate. Adam Kadmon is above all of them, yes. Adam Kadmon is above all of them. and the Shekhinah comes into displaying the discussion as the lowest level, the level of the Sphirot that is manifested as the level of the Sphirot that is called Malchut. So therefore, according, the more the generations, in other words, the generations of the Sphirot proliferate and go further and further down, the more the partzuf, the quality becomes, the more defined it becomes. The higher it is, the less defined it is, and the more it goes down, the more defined and the more limited it becomes. So therefore, the idea ultimately of the Sphirot is such that there's a necessity in the lower Sphirot to amalgamate, to join together, to what's it called? How do you call it? To make what's called a yichud of the Sphirot, to bring them together as two disparate entities, bring them together as one. And that bringing them together as one is a very important function of Kabbalistic meditation. It's to bring these elements together that initially were separated and apart. Okay. Are there any questions? No questions. Why is Ema facing forward? Ban is backward facing. Sorry. Why is Ma forward facing and Ban is backward facing? It's not really that Ban is backward facing. It's not really that it's backward facing. It's just that let's put it this way. The way of understanding the clusters of the Sphirot, the way they work in terms of what's called Partzufim, in other words, the way they work in terms of clusters of Sphirot or functions of Sphirot, the way Ma works, the way Ma and Ban work is the way of male and female, so to speak. It's the male and female elements of the Partzufim, Ma and Ban. In fact, you have on a higher level as well. But why is it that Ma and Ban have different roles? Well, they have roles which have to do with producing generations. In other words, producing, so to speak, producing their children, right? So in general, Ma and Ban are facing each other. That's the way it's supposed to be. Ma and Ban are supposed to face each other. But at times, Ban has to face downwards because Ban is essentially the mother of the children. She has to turn her back, so to speak, to her husband because she's busy with the children, so to speak, right? And everything can be understood through human analogies. And in fact, that's what a lot of Kabbalah is involved in doing, in describing spiritual events using human images, using human imagery and human analogs. So therefore, Ban is the partzuf of Nukva, is a female partzuf, whereas Ma is the male partzuf. Ma and Ban, that's what was just asked. 1 second, there is the time you arrive, Malchut, the separation from this is only an illusion. Let me just answer the question from Justin. Why is Ma forward facing while Ban is backward facing? It's not that Ma is forward facing so much as more that Ma is upward facing and Ban is facing downwards towards her children, right? Because Ban, the word Bina comes essentially from the word Ban, right? Bina, the Sphero of Bina, faces down towards her children. Just as the mother is usually more involved with the children than the father, so too the mother of the Sphirot, which is Bina, and that's where Ban comes from. In fact, the first two letters of Bina are Ban, right? The two letters of Bet Nun spell the word Ban, the name Ban. Bet Nun in Hebrew, and those are the mother. She is essentially the mother of the children, and therefore she is facing, generally, she's facing more downwards than Ma. Ma is generally facing upwards, and Ban is facing downwards. In other words, in producing and taking care of the lower Sphirot, whereas Ma is receiving from the higher worlds. So the time, Paul asked, by the time you arrive at Malchut, the separation felt by the soul is only an illusion. No, it's not necessarily an illusion, but it can be. Essentially, in other words, in the essence of the soul, hopefully things are all tied in and tied together, and things are facing each other, but it depends on the person's actions, whether in fact the various partsufim in the person's soul, we could call it, in the powers of the person's soul, are actually face to face or back to back or back to face. It very much depends on a person's behavior and what it is that they're doing with their lives and how much they are seeking out this yichud, this unification. The unification of, you could call it the unification within the soul, and the unification of the soul with the higher being, which we call the unification of the soul with God. Now, so by the time you arrive at Malchut, the separation felt in the soul is only an illusion. It can be or it cannot be. It depends. It can be an illusion if Malchut is facing in the right direction and Zeir Anpin, which is above Malchut, is also facing in the right direction towards each other, and then there's no real separation. Although the function of Malchut is to deal with separation. So therefore, Malchut, to a certain extent, is involved with separation, and therefore is in some sense separated. But it's not supposed to be that way. The Yichud of Malchut and Zeir Anpin, I'm not sure if everybody's understanding this, but the Yichud of the Sphirot, the Yichud means facing to each other in a procreative manner, so to speak. They face each other and produce either produce worlds or produce divine energy, let's call it. Okay. Ma and Ban are analogs in the partsuf of Nukva. Ban is the partsuf of Nukva, and Ma is the partsuf of Dechura, of male, rather than female. Ban is female, Ma is male. The separation of the soul is not an illusion depending on where you are, depending on where the higher up one goes, obviously the less it is. Is it an illusion? Well, it doesn't feel like it's an illusion necessarily, although the separation of the soul is never really, in life, the soul is never really separated from its higher aspects. It can become separated through what we call Aveira, through, and Aveira means a sin, that's the way it's usually translated, but La Aveira means to pass over, la'avor, right? A passing out of a certain state of unity into a state of disunity. And that can be expressed as a feeling of separation and a feeling of inner alienation, spiritual alienation. So Ma and Ban analogs in the partsuf of Nukva. In Nukva itself, there are Ma and Ban. Yes, you have Ma and Ban in the partsuf of Nukva itself. Every partsuf is a composite. And therefore, even Nukva itself, even though it's a Sphero of Malchut, it has Zeir Anpin and Malchut of Malchut. Yes. In the world of Tikkun. Not in the world of Tohu, but in the world of Tikkun. I'm just answering some questions. Is it so that we receive energies of the universes with our left side? Or left hand, but we send out those energies with our right in practical application. I think those left and right sides here are more of an analogy when we talk about receiving spiritual energies and so on. It's more of an analogy rather than a sort of geographical, if you know what I mean. So the left hand is the receiver and the right hand is the giver in general. That's the way the setup looks, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a person is either only one or the other. A person has to be an amalgamation of both, but maybe different modes at different times. Yes, it depends on where the development of the soul is. That is correct. Yes, so we receive with the left and the left side or left hand, but send out with our right. Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily work like that, Terry. We could receive energies of the universe on the right hand as well and give out with the left hand. It just depends. Usually the way we receive is hopefully with both hands, and the way we give is both with both hands as well. In other words, all the parts of Fim on the way down, all the parts of Fim generally have both aspects of male and female, right hand and left hand. It's true that in general, the two lowest parts of Fim are called Zer Anpin and Malchut or Nukva. And that generally is, Nukva is generally regarded as the receiver, and Zer Anpin is regarded as the giver in that sense. But it's not necessarily exclusively that way. It's just that that's the way it's designated. But on a higher level, you have Abba and Ema, Abba and Ema, which are translated means father and mother. It's like the father-mother relationship where you have two people on an equal, hopefully on an equal footing in a family. They're both producing, they're both doing things for their progeny, for what comes out of the both of them. In other words, their children, but probably in different ways. As we know, the father is usually somewhat more distant from the children than the mother. Is that always the case? No, it's not always the case. It's generally the case because that's the way things develop in the Sphirot. Okay, now why is Ma forward facing and Ban is backward facing? The reason for that is that Ban, I'm going back to Justin's question, Ban is backward facing because it's looking down. Ban is always looking down. Ban is the female element, and it's always looking down to her children. And that's why her back turns temporarily to Ma, so to speak. Her back is turned because she's concerned with her children, as we know from by the time you arrive at Malchut, the separation, way before you arrive at Malchut, the separation is illusory. There never is any separation. Malchut can appear, in Malchut there appears to be separation. Malchut can appear to be separated, but that's one of the things that we try and do through our life, through living a life of fulfilling the commandments and so on and so forth. What we try and do is we try and bring things that are facing back to back, so to speak, to face front to front. In other words, we confront, maybe that's the wrong word, we seek out the divine countenance, hopefully with our own countenance as well. This is very important in understanding how the Paratzufim work. The Paratzufim can be back to back. They can also be front to face. Now, when the Paratzufim are face to face, then they can produce generations, right? When Abba and Ema, Chochmah and Bina, are face to face, they can produce Zer, Anpin, and Malchut. But when they are not face to face, when they're back to back, in other words, when there's distance between them, when they're facing in different directions, when there's disagreement, so to speak, between them, then they cannot produce offspring, which is why they're there in the first place. To develop into further worlds. Okay, so where were we now and what were we talking about? Someone made a I don't know what that part of the discussion was about, but Kadmon is above all of them. Yeah, okay. It depends on where the development of the soul is. Yes, exactly. You can receive, generally you receive with your right hand, and generally you receive, the way it's, obviously there's no right hand and left hand when we talk about spiritual matters, but as we have the right hand is for receiving and the left hand is for giving. That's why the left hand is called the dark hand, because what you receive, you cannot give everything that you receive, or generally that's not the way it's done. So you receive with the right hand and you give with the left hand. In other words, you give in a more constricted way than you received. You keep some for yourself and you pass the rest on. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always like that or that it has to be like that. But there is that's the general way that things are. Okay, so is there face-to-back relationship? Yes. Let me just explain the relationship of the Paratzufim. The Paratzufim means a sphera or a cluster of sphirot, right? A sphera is for example, chokhmah, another sphera, bina. Now, when they are isolated sphirot, they're called chokhmah and bina. But when they are regarded as in a relationship, then they're called Abba and Ema. Abba and Ema translate loosely into English as father and mother. So when there's a father-mother relationship, in other words, they're relating to each other and they're relating to what they produce, in other words, the children, so to speak, right? Then the proper energies is that there's supposed to be a constant interrelationship of mother and father in the family. Of mother and father in the family. In fact, it says, train rain, the lomit partial almin. That's what it says in the Zohar, that mother and father are never actually separated, and they're never ever separated, right? But that's on a very, very lofty level. They are never separated. In practice, they come out as Zer Anpin and Malchut. Zer Anpin is on a lower level. That's the 6 Sphirot from Chesed to Yesod, and Malchut are on a lower level, and they're supposed to be that same yichud between Malchut, between Zer Anpin and Malchut. But there's various kinds of yichud. Let me explain. The yichud could be face-to-face, right? The face-to-face relationship is the closest one that there is, face-to-face. Then there could be face-to-back, back-to-face, which is more or less the same, except depending on who's on which side. And then there's back-to-back, right? Back-to-back is the worst relationship, obviously. There's a back-to-back relationship where you could say when, like, for instance, a couple are not talking to each other, they're back-to-back, right? They're not talking to each other, they're angry with each other, whatever. That would be sort of the back-to-back relationship. The face-to-face relationship is when that's the intimate relationship. That's a relationship that should be. Where are we now? What were we talking about? Why is Ma facing forward and Ban is backward facing? It's not that Ban is so much backward facing, Ban is down facing. Ban faces down, right? Ma faces up towards, and Ban faces generally down. Now, why is this the case? Because this is the case of male and female, the male and female relationship in a family. In other words, the male relationship is that he is supposed to be looking up to how shall we say, raise the family up to a higher level, but the ban, which is the mother relationship, is taking care of the children down below. Now, there are other aspects to it. There's also the aspect, and no one should get upset by this, but there's also the relationship of what is called Ma and Ban is the spiritual relationship. Ma is the spiritual relationship, the relationship of nullifying oneself to that which is above you. And the Ban aspect is bringing spirituality down into the world, bringing that spirituality down into the world. That essentially is what the mother and father relationship is supposed to be. The father is the one who's supposed to be receiving spirituality from above, bringing it to his family, and then the mother is the one that distributes it to the children. Now, this is all obviously only in analogy, but nevertheless, the analogy is an important analogy. The notion of Shechina comes into play in this discussion. Yes, Shechina is the attribute of Malchut. The Sphera of Malchut is called the Shechina. That's the one that's most closely associated with the world. Now, Ma and Ban are not necessarily forward and backward facing. The ideal is that they face each other. Ma and Ban are both forward facing each other. But generally, Ban is down facing because it's the mother taking care of the children, whereas Ma is up facing because he has to receive his the divine energy from above in order to provide for his family, so to speak. Ma and Ban are the analogs in Zer Anpin, Ma, and Ban is Nukva. Zer Anpin and Nukva, Ma and Ban. We receive energies in the universe with our left side or left hand. We send out those energies in the right in practical application. Yes, that is correct. It depends on where the development of the soul is. Yes, that is. Is there ever a back-to-back relationship? Unfortunately, there is. Yeah, it's called achor ba'achor. Now, the zivug, the mating, so to speak, the amalgamation, the meeting of the partzufim is supposed to be face-to-face, but it's sometimes face-to-back, and it's sometimes back-to-back. Back-to-back is the least productive relationship, as you can understand. In the human analogy, obviously, a face-to-face relationship can produce children, a back-to-back relationship cannot. And that's the to continue the generations is obviously what we are trying to do. So we started off explaining the concepts of male and female, and that is where we more or less started this whole idea. So Ma and Ban are analogs of the parts of Zer Anpin and Nukva. Yeah, Ma is Zer Anpin and Ban is Nukva. Correct. That is correct. But Ma and Ban are the divine names associated with Zer Anpin and Nukva. Right? Because Ma is the divine name Yud Kei Vav Kei spelled out in a certain way, Yud Vav Daled, and then Hey is Hey Aleph, and Vav Aleph Vav, and Mem Aleph, Hey Aleph rather. That's Shema, and then Shem Ban is, you spell it somewhat differently. Shem Ban, it's spelled Yud Vav Daled, Hey Hey, Vav Vav Hey Hey, adds up to 52. Ma adds up to 45. Ban adds up to 52. Two different kinds of energies, two different kinds of manifestation of divinity in the world and in the creation of the world. It depends on where the development of the soul is to a large extent. There's a back-to-back relationship. Yes, I explained. Difference between the verse he created them and the notion of E being made from Adam's rib. Yeah. Yeah, okay, I understand. Let me just get that thing on the screen again. Where were we? I think here. No. Where was it? Let me just see. I think I lost it now. 1 second. Yeah, I think I lost it. Here. All right. 1 second, folks. Let me try this again. Yeah, here we go. Screen one. There we go. Okay. Let me explain a little bit about more about this concept over here. When it says that God created man, Vayivra Elokim et Adam, but Salmo, God created man in his image, but Sem Elokim Bara'oto, in the image of God, he created him. That was when he was one paratzuf, one visage, which is male and female together. Right, male and female together, and then those become separated into two separate entities. Zachar unekeva barawotam, male and female, he created them in the plural. First it says oto, him, right, because it was one, and that's the whole story of Adam and Eve were created. Adam was created as a single entity with Adam and Eve together. They were one, they were a single entity together. And then there had to be the separation, which is called the separated rib. It's not the rib, that's bad translation. Chava represents the Sphera of Malchut, and Adam represents the Sphirot of Zer Anpin, and they were separated. They were initially created back to back, so to speak, back to back. And then when they separated, only then can they come face to face, right? And then once they come face to face, then they can, the next verse can apply, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. When you're back to back, there's no possibility of being fruitful and multiplying, right? Only when you are face to face is there a possibility of being fruitful and multiplying. In other words, continuing the generations. Okay. What's the difference between the verse he created them and an ocean? Yeah, so he created them initially together as one thing, and then they were separated into two entities, the male entity and the female entity that now can come back together face to face. They were created together. They were created together. Okay. Okay, so that's the concept that we wanted to discuss tonight, the concept of male, essentially the concept of male and female. I think we have to stop here. It's more than enough. We've been going over an hour. In any event, let me pause.